So, welcome. I'm going to introduce you today to something called Sociocracy 3.0. It's a framework for evolving agile organizations. Who of you has already heard of Sociocracy? Quite a few. And Holacracy? A few more. So you all probably all know about teal organizations as well. Who has heard of responsive organizations? Intrinsify? It's a rather German movement, I think. And the New Work movement? Okay. Sociocracy 3.0 is something that covers the same domain, but in a way that's a bit different. It's a framework of patterns for agile organizations. That means that it's just a collection of ideas that you can or cannot implement in your organization. And it's also, a pattern is something that you can tweak and remix and adapt just as you like. So it's a totally open and free thing. It's a collection of suggestions and ideas. When I talk about agile organizations, I think of an organization that is sustainably creating a valuable product with happy people. If you take one of these three components out of the equation, you'll have either an organization that will die soon, an organization that does something nobody needs, or an organization nobody wants to work in. So that's not a good choice. Let's look at the history. Sociocracy 3.0 didn't come to be out of thin air. There's actually a long tradition. The first ideas of sociocracy are more than 150 years old. It was the idea of combining the scientific method and social ideals into a new way of governing a state. And there were, on the way, two implementations that are noteworthy of sociocracy. The first one was in a school in the 1920s that ran until the 1960s, and the second one is the sociocracy we know today, what we refer to as classic sociocracy. It's a method that is very popular in the Netherlands. There's even a law, if you have a sociocratic organizations in the Netherlands, you don't need a workers' council because the workers run the organization themselves. Holacracy started out as sociocracy, and then it got tweaked and twisted and became what it is now. And Sociocracy 3.0 was an idea of me and my friend James Priest. We said that sociocracy is such a great thing, but there's no free materials, so let's go and create materials so everyone can actually learn about it and use it. And then we found that a method is not actually what we want. We want something that is more open and more free, something that everyone can take into their context and work with in their culture and actually do a change and not have this revolution imposed on them, which will never work. So, yeah, we sat together and looked at all these ideas from Agile, from Lean, from Holacracy, from classic sociocracy, and created this framework of ideas, which we have now. We had a few design goals. We wanted this to be open, so not a fixed method. We wanted this also to be free, so it's available under Creative Commons Free Culture License. Everyone can do with it whatever they want. We wanted it to be really lightweight. You can add complexity if you want, but that's not what we are after. We want something that is actionable, so there should be an idea in it that you can take and implement in your circle of influence. Even if you're just one person, you can pick something. There will be something in for you that you can do. And we wanted it to be effective, so we just wanted to mostly integrate ideas and practices that already proved effective in organizations. What I'm going to talk about today is 4 points. How can we in organizations transcend hierarchy? Because hierarchy does a lot of bad things to organizations. Then we talk about how can we create an organization that is slowly evolving into something new. How can we create organizational structure? And how do we get to that future state from where we are at the moment? Since we have only 20 minutes for this, I'm going to run through these sections very quickly. The first thing, transcending hierarchy. What's the problem with organizations? If you give individuals power over other people, the so-called individual disciplinary power, you will end up with a hierarchy that divides the organization into parts so they're easier to govern. what happens is the paradox of management. If you apply a hierarchy over an organization, you limit the complexity of the organization in an artificial way, and this limits, in turn, the complexity an organization can address. So you're making your organization less effective by having that hierarchy. The main reason for this is competition. Since there's only one spot at the top, and this usually comes with the highest pay, there's competition for that spot. If we could get rid of this, we could get rid of many problems and dysfunction we have in organizations. If you look at the relationship of Agile and organizations that have a hierarchy, you have this culture of a hierarchy, a culture of competition, and you have this strategy. We now do software development through Agile because people claim that we are faster, that we have better quality, and that we can do a lot of great things with it. But the culture of a hierarchy and competition eats up Agile, so it never, I don't know of a single Agile implementation within a hierarchical organization that is really turned out to be great. I've seen many that fail. So how can we create an organization without hierarchy? It's actually pretty simple. We give the decision-making power to the people who are affected by a decision. That's usually a group. And so you don't have these individual incentives anymore. And this decision-making power would apply to everything. So the strategy, the contracts you negotiate, the compensation, the plans, the product decisions, role assignment, the dividends you pay to your shareholders, the organizational structure, the work process, simply everything. One implication for this, if you think in terms of Scrum, that you don't have a product owner anymore. The product owner cannot make product decisions because they affect a lot of other people, and you need them to bring them to the table and make these decisions together. But how do we get there? How can we do this effectively? The most important concept in a sociocratic organization is a circle. It's just a group of peers. There's no rank. You can picture them people sitting around a topic and making a decision on a topic. A circle can be permanent, like a team, or a circle can be temporary. Something comes up that affects several people, and then they get together and make a decision on it. The decisions are usually made by consent. That means a decision is only then considered to be made when nobody affected has an objection against it. That sounds... Many people, if they think first about consent, they think you're never getting anywhere. But there's actually a convergent decision-making process that makes getting to consent rather easy. If you want to scale up an organization, you cannot bring all the people affected by a decision to a table. So there is a way for electing delegates to take part in a decision and hold the decision-making powers of other people for a moment or for a longer period of time. The reason why circles make better decisions is there's more knowledge in a group. If I make a decision, I just know what I know. If I take 3 other people, we know more, inevitably. There's more engagement. If you ask people their opinion, if you let them contribute to a decision, they want to participate because it affects them. There's more creativity because you're taking away the power that somebody else has over you. If I don't have to worry about my next pay rise or getting fired, I can speak my mind. I can be honest about how this decision would affect my basic beliefs and values. And this all leads to more commitment to the outcome. If we make a decision together, we are going to follow through, much more likely than if somebody imposes this decision upon us. Let's talk about consent. It's the absence of objections. The most minimum thing in consent is everyone can live with it. It's good enough for now and safe enough to try. If an objection comes out later, you need to rediscuss this decision. We learned something, so we need to talk about it again. That's a good thing, because it takes out the drive to be perfect with a decision. We just make the decision that is good enough for now and safe enough to try, and then we correct course as we learn. The most important tool for getting these decisions done is actually avoiding discussion, because discussion favors the one who has the most articulate argument or has the most physical authority or who is the loudest. So with a sociocratic organization, we facilitate most of the events in rounds where everyone speaks in turn and there's a facilitator who maintains this equivalence. Many of the processes you will see in Sociocracy, they have a structure of rounds. So let's look how we can actually create an organization that learns and evolves as the environment around it changes. We can already evolve products, for example, with Scrum or extreme programming. We can evolve business model through the lean startup, and we can evolve work processes through Kanban. Can we continuously evolve the entire organization? How would that work? Simple. Let's make every single decision that we have in the company, let's make it an experiment. We're talking here about policy decision. A policy is simply any guideline or agreement we have, we call that a policy. So a plan, a contract, a role assignment, every decision of consequence is a policy. And the way to do this is first you identify the motivation. Why do we need to make a decision at all? Then you design the experiment, you make a proposal for the policy, you commit to that decision, you commit to run the experiment, and then after a while you review what happened and you evolve the decision. For the first part, identifying the motive, we have something that's called the driver. This is the replacement for goals, aims, mission, vision, or purpose, because all these things, they are just assumptions how the future should be. The driver is something that looks at the now. What is the situation we're in that triggered our getting together for the decision? And what are the needs we associate with this situation? Needs could be on a deeply personal level, and they could be on a very abstract level, like shareholder revenue or return of investment or a long-term strategy would also be a need. The process to get to the driver is rather easy. We have this tension that brings us together. Something is not the way it should be, or at least we think something is not the way it should be. Then we go in rounds and collect all the facts and observations associated with this situation. Once we're done, we identify the needs associated with it, and then we put that down into a logbook so we can refer to it later. And then we have this last questions, do we really need to act on this? Is this really important that we make a decision and act on this now, or can we just actually ignore it? The way the driver is laid out with the situation and the needs is really easy to review. We can look at this list of observations and facts half a year down the road, and we can say, are these still true? Did new facts arise, or can we remove some of them? And we can see the needs and say, do we still think these are the needs? Did we learn that these are the real needs that came out of it? And the other good thing is the response to a driver. We can change the situation, or we can try to satisfy the needs. So this is a really open way of approaching a problem. The next thing, designing the experiment. For a decision, before we can make a decision, we need to look at all the sides of the problem, create lots of ideas, and then distill them down into a proposal that's actionable. So we do the first part, collect the considerations, all the questions we need answered, and collect the small ideas that we will put together to the proposal in a large group, because we can go in rounds and everyone can chuck stuff in. But then we elect 2 or 3 people who take all that stuff and make a proposal out of it, because we are much more effective with this in a smaller group. And with this proposal, we go into a process called consent decision making. This is the actual core of Sociocracy. This is what Holacracy calls integral decision making, but it's the same thing. The whole circle, everyone affected, has the opportunity to ask questions to understand the proposal. Then everyone can speak their mind about it, how they feel about it, and then we harvest the objections that are still in the room. If we find some objections, sometimes we can integrate them into the proposal on the spot. Sometimes we need to refer back to another proposal forming process. This is something that a group of 6 or 8 people can do in 1 or 2 minutes if they're experienced with the process, with a decision. Then you attach a review date to the decision together. So if you agree that we revisit this in 3 months or in 2 weeks or whatever, seems appropriate. And then it comes up for review in the monthly governance meeting. This is a meeting a permanent circle has to process all the stuff that comes up. And Since each policy has a review date and evaluation criteria attached to it, this review is really easy. If somebody has a tension with this decision, you can bring it up in a governance meeting and trigger an early review. So this is the basic process, how such an organization would run. A word about people and roles. In Holacracy and in Sociocracy, you don't have any positions. You have roles, and people can wear many hats. There's an election process, which is not democratic, but also based on consent. Who will fulfill a certain role, and the role always has a term associated to it. So nobody's elected indefinitely. Everyone, this role will be re-elected, usually after half a year, some roles after 3 months, depending on agreement. And there's also a performance improvement process, a process where the whole circle helps the one in the role improve their performance in the role. Okay, let's take a look at organizational structure and why we need to have it. This is what usually the hierarchy gives to organizations. And one of the main purposes of organizational structure is facilitates effective collaboration. It's not maintaining power of those in power. It's actually helping us work together on what the organization does. We built the entire organizational structure from circles and not from individuals. And the structure is nothing fixed. It always shifts and changes as we discover that we have more effective ways of collaboration. And what we are aiming for is what we call a heterarchy. It's the coexistence of different functional structures at the same time. So you might have a different structure for helping people grow in an organization and for evolving a product, for example. And these structures coexist naturally. The easiest structural pattern is the representative. One circle elects somebody to be part of another circle to represent that circle's knowledge and needs in the other circle. The next thing is the double linking. Two circles send a delegate to each other. So in each decision these circles made, there's the perspective, there's two perspectives of the other circle because two people are members of both circles. There's the nested circle where you can just expand one role. If you find that this role needs more capacity, a lot more capacity, you can create a circle out of a role. And this is nested in the outer circle. There might be just one delegate of this nested circle in the decision-making of the outer circle, or there might be all of the people in the inner circle part of the outer circle's decision-making. Depends on the size of the circle and how you apply it. There's also a pattern for coordination if you have something like architecture or product decisions that affect several circles. Each of those circles can elect a representative into this governing circle. There's also the service circle, which would apply to something like HR. You need HR functions for three circles. So each circle elects a delegate into the HR circle to make sure the decisions that are made in the HR circles represent actually the needs of the circles, of the aligned circles. And if you look at the bigger picture, there's also patterns for the whole organization. You can have a peach organization. I think this is pretty well known. You can create this out of circles too. You can have the double-linked hierarchy. That's what classic Sociocracy and Holacracy does, where you have where the upper circle sends down the leader to the lower circle, and the lower circle elects a representative to the higher circle to balance the power systems. This is still a hierarchy, and it comes with its problems. There is still a strong leadership culture in these organizations where you have this idea of up and down of managers and workers. And then there's two patterns that affect networks of multiple organizations. So you can actually have in a backbone organization, if several organizations decide to work on a joint project, or they outsource the same class of services, for example, IT or systems administration or something. The backbone organization gives you a way to organize that, to represent the needs of the external organizations in the backbone organizations. The fractal organization is something that you would apply if you have many small organizations like local branches that have a pretty similar structure, and they want to learn from each other. So you create a fractal organization that allows to align learning along the functional divisions of these small branches. This would be probably an hour or two worth of talking about the fractal organizations. So I'm not going to do that. Now the big question, how do we get there? Do we make a revolution? Revolution is not such a good idea. It breaks organizations. The latest great example is, I think, Zappos, who had a really strong culture and an employee turnover of 1% per year. And now they started doing holacracy, and they have suddenly an employee turnover of 14% per year, which means that there is something wrong with this transition. Somehow people are dissatisfied with it. And that's not something you want to do. If you have an organization, you want to keep everyone in because you hired them for a reason. So if you change in a way that drives people out, you're doing the wrong kind of change. Same thing with an agile transition. There's this myth that 15 to 20% of employees leave an organization to an agile transition. Why is that so? Why should that be so? I think you're doing it wrong if you're doing it like this. You have to find a way to meet everyone where they are at the moment and inspire them that this is for everyone a great new thing that's emerging, and everybody's perspective is important. If you drive out the people who have a different opinion, you're making your organization weaker. And you're breaking stuff that's already working. That's also not a good idea. So what you do is you try to create a pull system for organizational change where people actually pull in the stuff that they think might help with evolving the organizations. That means they would need to know what ideas are out there. They would need to feel confident enough to suggest these ideas. And one good way is you trigger continuous improvement on actually operational processes and be as management open to suggestions that affect the structure of the entire organization. And then you expand the scope of the experiment. You start with one circle and then you gradually make it bigger. And always remember, context is king. This is the most important part about any transition or transformation. All the patterns, they are just ideas. They worked for somebody somewhere. It doesn't necessarily mean they work for you. So you need to remix them. You need to adapt them. You need to bring in your own context and change them. And the most important thing about changing patterns is you need to do it together. You need to do it in a group, and you need to watch the outcome closely and evolve and always try to learn and go the next step, and not just take some fixed method and plug it over your organization. A few more words on 4 points I find really interesting because people ask me a lot about this after presentations. The first is organizational values. If you can agree on a set of organizational values, you will have to decide on much less policy. This will trim down your body of policy enormously, and this will make your organization run smoothly. Then again, organizational values are just another bit of policy. So you decide on them, and then you need to evolve them. You always need to check, are they still true? Is this a comprehensive set? Do we need something more? Is there something in our culture that is not actually reflected in these values yet? So this is also a process. The legal perspective, it's entirely possible to create a sociocratic organization that is compliant with any legal rules that might apply on the planet. One thing is the personal legal responsibility. If I have a personal legal responsibility as a CEO, for example, I have the power to object to any decision that would put me into jail. That's actually pretty easy. There's also a way of laying down decision-making processes or circle structures into the legal bylaws of an organization, so even the shareholders can kick them out again. That's also important. One thing you need to decide early is how you engage with bringing new people in the organization and actually also leaving an organization, how you can remove people from the organization if everything else fails. There needs to be a process, and this should be one of the earliest things you decide about. And another thing is compensation and dividends. There's actually lots of organizations that have transparent salaries, and there's also many organizations that transparently decide about dividends, so there's many patterns that you can use for this. Okay, now what? If I got you interested, there's a website. And the low traffic newsletter. Actually, we didn't send out a single newsletter, so it's really low traffic, but we will in the future. We will actually do that when we launch the community platform, which is in planning and will be out in a few weeks. And this will be for everyone. This will not only be for Sociocracy 3.0, it should be a platform also for classic Sociocracy and for the people associated with Holacracy, because we don't believe in these divisions. We want everyone to come together and talk about this. Yeah, we have a Twitter account. We don't do much on it. Usually just announce presentations for now. And we have a translation platform, so you can even translate the method into your language if you think that the presentations we have up are something you'd like to use in a different language. You can just do it. Okay. I have a workshop tomorrow, yes, for 12 people only. But we'll find a way to make it work if there's more demand. I'm pretty sure that we find something. Questions or lunch? Yes?
I have one question. So one thing in the organization is that once every year you have the salary review process, in which you are discussing with how much or how less you should add to the salary to that employee.
Mm-hmm.
And the principles that you showed me are really good, and I think they are applicable in many situations. But I was wondering, what I remember is that you said that for a decision you need to involve all the parties that are affected.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, for a salary review, how should you do this?
Well,
Because you should involve also the employee that is in discussion for salary review.
Sure.
There are some subjective opinions there.
Well, you're talking about individual salary decisions. That's not something I would recommend for an organization. I would recommend that you do a set of rules, a salary formula where you can actually calculate everyone's salary, and that should be something that is not related to the subjective impression of anyone. That's not a good idea. And usually what you do when you approach salary discussions and you get together and everyone's afraid of it, of creating this formula, what you end up talking about is fairness. How do you evaluate fairness in your context? There's the fairness of equity, so I'm of equivalence. I should earn the same amount of you because we're both human beings, but then you only put in 20 hours and I put in 40. Then again, you have studied for 20 years and I'm just a noob. And so we need to discuss how we, in this organization, in this context, we evaluate these dimensions of fairness, and then we create a salary formula that works for everyone. You can actually, on my blog, which is also very low traffic, there is a post on transparent salaries. And many organizations outside the Sociocratic field, they're doing this. So there's lots of information. There's even a few articles in the Harvard Business Review about this. And I'm happy to talk to you about this for another 2 hours, if you find me. Anything else? Yes?
How does Scrum integrate into Sociocracy?
Well, you don't have a product owner anymore because he can't make these decisions alone. Other than that, well, you can have iterations, you can have a backlog. Yeah. I mean, the most important change is you would invest the team into the product decisions because they're the most affected. But yes, I think what it does is you take out the stupid parts from Scrum and you make it work.
But I believe that it's difficult because what we have in software development is people that are specialized. For instance, you have developers that are spending most of the time on development.
Yep.
But if you want them to take product decision, they need to learn the market, they need to learn the competitors.
No, they just contribute to the product decisions. They put their perspective of the deep dive into a special area of the code or the database or the infrastructure or whatever on the table when we make product decisions. So they can have an objection and say, if we do it like this, this is going to take a year. And you need to integrate the wisdom of everyone who is affected by the product, and the developers most.
I got it also. They contribute to the decision,
Yeah.
but they don't have the responsibility.
They also have the responsibility. Everyone affected has the responsibility. Shared responsibility is double responsibility, not half. Responsibility is actually like love. It gets more when you share it.
What happens if stakeholders cannot take a joint decision, like they have conflict, there are conflicts in their interests?
Well, there's no such a thing as a conflict of interest. This is only until you understand the other's perspective that you see it as a conflict. You have different requirements, and you need to find an alternative that goes beyond my way or your way. We need to find this third alternative. Nobody can find out on their own because they need the other slice of the truth, the other perspective. This is something that these kind of decision-making processes do. So we need to transcend this conflict thinking. And this is something, if you apply consent decision-making, people will, this is a transformative process personally. If you sit in a group and you talk in circles and you cannot reply to what somebody else says, this changes the thinking environment. You do not listen to reply, you start listening to understand. And this is where the conflict goes away and all the perspectives come together and you create something new. This is what triggers innovation and creativity.
There's one thing which is bugging me when it's people sitting around the table and talking about the problem. I found this process to be suboptimal compared to modeling the problem together, talking, visualizing in a way which is, you still get to consent, but you're not trapped in we are sitting around the table. We're just talking about an immaterial.
Oh yeah, you can do that, of course. But these are just two of the processes you can apply. You can apply any other process to get to the experiment. I would not recommend a much different process to actually make this decision because the decision making just takes 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But designing the experiment, design thinking, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to, sorry.
How you handle conflict values in the teams. So the teams say, yes, we do, but they don't, because it's a high value to them. So how do you, that's reality very often from my point of view.
Well, this is a tension. We said we do something, but we don't do it. You bring up the tension, and since there is usually nobody in a position of power, the team might respond to the tension. If you bring it up, what can we do? We go into a proposal forming process, and we say, okay, we made this decision, why didn't we do it? Do we need somebody who kicks us in the ass? Somebody who reminds us every morning? Do we need to make a stand-up, for example? That brings... So this is the process you do. You just be open with it. Somebody has this tension, and if you manage to establish that monthly meeting, or a retrospective or whatever, you can translate this, the tension into learning about the problem and into a new decision. Eventually, you will arrive at a decision that works. But it might take some time.
Do you have experiences of the speed of decision making with the way you describe?
Yeah.
Like what?
Of course. It's usually faster than any other kind of decision making that relies on an individual making the decision. I've done this, personally I've done this in several organizations that had huge problems with bad decisions. You had, for example, a product manager who decided something, and then there came the objections naturally from the developers, and he changed it and went to the next one, and he changed it again, and then he said, well, if everyone has objections, I'm not going to do it anymore. And he was pissed and ran away and came back an hour later, and this game started again. And so in this case, we had really fast, we were really fast to create better decisions. And My friend James Priest, he's teaching sociocracy for about 15 years to intentional communities, to anarchists living in the wood, basically, sometimes, who cannot agree on anything, and they find this a process where they can actually deal with the idea of collaboration and other people's needs, and something that was so foreign to them because they have been wounded by hierarchies or power that has been exerted over them. So yes, it works quite well, and it's actually, I'd say it takes me an hour to teach a group to use that kind of decision making, and they'll stick with it.
When it doesn't work. When it does not work.
When it does not work, do you do something else? You try to figure out why it doesn't work.
I was referring to the keynote.
Yeah. Many things do not work on the first try. Since this needs people invested in the process, it usually doesn't work if you order them to do it. If you bring in their engagement, if you make it an experiment and say, well, let's try to make decisions like this for a month and then see how it fares, it usually works. It doesn't work if you have a hierarchy that says, oh, I need to have a sociocratic organization, you now need to behave like this. So the classic sociocracy does this for about 40 years. They bring it into organizations, and what I've heard from them is that there's often the case that there is a CEO who's hugely invested in sociocracy. And when the CEO leaves a couple of years later, the sociocracy slowly starts to dissolve. So this is one scenario how you cannot bring it in. It needs engagement of everyone, it needs openness. So if you create these barriers, either you do this or you're out, it doesn't work. You cannot prescribe it, you cannot order it. There's actually a few examples of organizations who are not co-located, but it makes it, of course, much easier. With all with all distributed organizations, you need the right people who can work this way. I have personally no experience with this because I'm not good with distributed organizations.
You mentioned that the group that is the basement of this model is created, and after a period it can be changed. I mean, the members of a group. What is a thing that should trigger that change, so that the group understands that someone has to be brought in or brought out? How is it?
Well, what I said before is that there is temporary groups that just form when a certain issue arises, and permanent groups like teams. And so your question would refer to a permanent group that needs changing of members. The group the circle is responsible for its own development. So the circle would identify they need new skills, new capacities, and they would make a decision how to bring that in. And since this would affect other circles probably, because they would have to draw in people from other circles, they would need to form a temporary circle around that issue and resolve that together. This is the process how this happens.
Following question to that, in Scrum you have the situation that a team is growing, and then at a certain time you have to split the team.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have natural split. And what is your experience with the size of these circles? 10, is it 20?
Well, I have facilitated circles of 30 people, and I'm not going to do it again.
I understand that.
That's not, it works with rounds. It works really well, and sometimes it's necessary, but that's not the size of a group that makes a decision.
And then how you split them?
They split themselves. The circle is responsibility for its own development. So the circle would identify that it's no longer effective and find a way of using any of these patterns, for example, or a totally different way of splitting functions. And usually not the circle alone, but the environment around it would be brought in so they could make a decision that works for the whole organization, or at least the part that would be affected.
Really short one. Is the decision-making process explicitly time-boxed? or you just rely on the fact that you can make it quick?
It's not time boxed.
Okay.
You take as much time as you need. If somebody needs to speak a bit more, then you let them usually.
If you have this circle structure and you're constantly shifting responsibilities, like basically a circle, select different people over and over again for the same thing, how do you ensure that the knowledge keeps being shared?
Well, you're referring to roles. I've actually not seen this happen, that roles switch a lot. You usually elect a role for quite a while, for half a year, and you have this improvement process where the circle gets together and helps people improve. So when the role is up for re-election, you can take into account considerations that are actually new. You take into account the work experience of something, of course, but then this person might have 7 other roles, so they might have no more capacity for that role. So on re-election, you use somebody else, and then you would make also a decision how you can bring this person into the role. If the ownership of the role changes, you would usually have the person who had this role before coach the other person for a while. So, we can have lunch. Thank you.